Yesterday I was scrolling through Twitter, as one does, and something caught my eye. No, it wasn't Zach Lesage tweeting about Mega Excadrill, but that does happen very often. It was this. And this is Raging Bolt Ogerpon's matchup spread. And if I told you this was Raging Bolt Ogerpon's matchup spread without actually it being from PokeHive, you probably wouldn't believe me, because honestly, I didn't believe it either. This is an insane matchup spread, right? Let's take a look at just those top two, Dragapult, Dusknoir, Dragapult. 64% win rate. That's crazy, right? Unfortunately, this isn't like the craziest, there's not a lot of Raging Bolts going around. So this isn't the biggest sample size, but look, 22 wins and 12 losses, that's pretty good, right? That's pretty good. And 38 wins and 21 losses, that's also pretty good, right? But then you start scrolling down, right? And you see Grimmsnarl Frostlass, 61, Zoroark, 59, Dhelmise, 55, and then 55, 53, 52, and you kind of realize that, damn, this deck doesn't lose too much, right? The only thing it really loses to is Festival Lead and Alexander Dunsparce, right? And that's fair, you know, Festival Lead and Alexam is probably built to beat decks like this, which rely on these bigger 2 prizes. So it kind of got me thinking, you know, Worlds is around the corner, and I am predicting Dragapult to be the most played deck. And obviously right now I am testing a lot of Dragapult, right? The problem is with Dragapult, it does have some counters such as Zoroark, so usually people do tend to play counters to whatever deck is going to be the biggest, and I have a feeling Zoroark's going to be quite big. So when I stumbled upon Raging Bolt and saw that this beats Dragapult and Zoroark, it got me thinking, right? And thinking got me to testing. And testing went pretty damn well. I went 12-2 with this deck on Pokemon Live. Or it's Pokemon Live, so don't take it like for... Take it with a pinch of salt, right? It's Pokemon Live. My 2 losses were to a Zoroark because I bricked, and then to an Alakazam Dunsparce because Alakazam Dunsparce. But honestly, this deck looks quite good, and it also feels quite good. So what deck list am I playing right now? Well, I'll put that up on screen now. So here is the deck list I have been playing. Shout out to whoever I stole this from on Limitless TCG, because that is the list I've been playing. And honestly, usually whenever I steal lists, I change a few cards because I don't really like the way they were built. This one, however, is one of the first times I haven't changed a card. The deck feels really, really good. I'll put the name up on screen because I feel like this time this person does deserve some recognition because this deck is actually really good. So let's just break it down a little bit. We've got 4 Mega Kangaskhan because 4 Mega Kangaskhan it's just the best starter in the deck, right? Starting, it's also the draw engine of the deck, right? Being able to start this card and just get plus 2 cards every single turn is just pretty good, right? And then we've got 3 Ogerpons because, you know, Teal Dance to power up for the Raging Bolt attack. We're also playing 4 Energy Switch, so if we attach the Teal Dance, we can use Energy Switch to move that around to like Clefairy or Kangaskhan, which you attack with quite often, right? And then as we move a little bit more to the right, things get a little bit weirder, right? We only have 1 Lee's Clefairy, which I think is okay because Lee's Clefairy is in this deck for... It's honestly less for Dragapult and more just as an efficient attacker, right? All these other attackers do cost quite a bit. For example, Kangaskhan needs 3 energy. Raging Bolt only needs 2 energy, but it does need to discard a bunch of energy, right? So essentially, you need 2 to 5 energy around there to do any meaningful damage. Then you've got your Wellspring Ogerpon, which honestly isn't a great attacker into anything that is like an EX or evolved. And honestly, you sob more than Torrential Pump nowadays. So Clefairy is kind of just there to deal some consistent damage with Area 0 under depths. It can sometimes just one-shot stuff. And obviously, there's just a really easy way to knock out a Dragapult. And sometimes it's a way to set up a checkmate when you set up a Raging Bolt and also a Lily's Clefairy. And it's also super easy to power up with either just a singular Crispin or a attach for turn plus E-Switch is very... consistent and easy. Pheasantipity is Pheasantipity. And then we have Iron Crown, right? 9 Crown, I didn't really like the idea of Iron Crown, mainly because I didn't know the idea of Iron Crown. And Iron Crown kind of makes a little bit more sense to me now that I've kind of been playing the deck and understand what it does a bit more. So Twin Shovels does 50 damage for each of your Pokemon. It does 50 damage to 2 of your opponent's Pokemon, right? And that's pretty decent, but it is pretty low damage. So you might be thinking, when are you ever going to be doing that? When is it ever worth, you know, actually powering up the energy to deal 100 damage? That seems quite shite, right? You have Water Ogerpon. Well, you kind of want to do this against decks that play Shaman. And this is possible because it says This attack does 50 damage to 2 of your opponent's Pokemon. This attack's damage isn't affected by weakness, resistance, or by any effects on those Pokemon, meaning it goes through Shaman, it goes through Sinistra, and stuff like that. Sinistra doesn't have that. Forget I said that, right? It goes through Shaman, right? So against decks that have really low HP, such as Alakazam, such as Festival Elite, right? Those two really bad matchups, this gives you a fighting chance. So I think Iron Crown is really nice because if you're able to power it up early on, you want to go first and power it up. Sometimes you can just start twin shoveling. Or it's not. It's twin shuttles. Dog. I thought this was twin shovels the entire time. Oh, all right. Well, it's kind of ruined the card for me. Damn. Well, if you twin shuttles, you can kind of take earlier prize cards, and then you can kind of go through the Shaman, right? So it is pretty good, right? But back to the deck list. It is really consistent. That's the one thing I like about this deck, is that it's really like quite low maintenance. All you really have to do is power up attack and attack, right? There's not much you have to do, and you have a lot of good synergy for that. You're playing 3 Meowths, which can fetch your Cyranos in the early turns, and your Crispins in the mid to late game. Then you have your Cypher Maniacs Code Breaking, which can also be powered up by Meowth, and that can get your like Unfair Stamp and your switches and like your, you know, your more niche cards that you need in specific scenarios, right? But there is the one concept that I absolutely love about this deck, and that is with the Area Zeros, right? The Area Zeros, I think, are the best card in this deck for one reason, and that is the Chien-Pao. Chien-Pao makes this deck just feel so much more complete, right? Beforehand, Dragapult would beat Raging Bolt by dealing 200 damage to a Raging Bolt, putting some damage on a Teal'c Ogerpon, knocking out said Teal'c Ogerpon and knocking out said Raging Bolt in the same turn, essentially trading 2-2-2, but it's more so just going 4-0, right? And that is quite difficult to deal with, right? There's no real counterplay towards that, unless you play Chien-Pao, right? And Chien-Pao Snow Sink, you don't attack. Don't look at the attack. We don't even play 2 water energies, so don't look at the attack. But Snow Sink lets you discard a stadium when you put it into play. And you might be thinking that's super counterintuitive because Area Zero lets you go wide, right? And that's what you want to do, is go wide, because you have a lot of these Pokemon that you actually want to bench, right? You want a Pheasantipity in play, you want a Latias in play, you want a Kangaskhan in play, you want a Raging Bolt in play, you're probably going to have Meowths in play, right? You have a lot of things that you need in play. So you want to go wide a lot of the times. But for example, if Dragapult does deal 200 damage to a Raging Bolt, right? And then does 10 damage to an Ogerpon, or maybe the other way around, it does 200 damage to an Ogerpon and does 40 damage to a Raging Bolt, you can retreat these Pokemon, right? You can put them on the bench, and then put the Chien-Pao down and discard those Pokemon, essentially wiping out turns from your opponent. You don't have to, obviously, it doesn't like wipe out all of the damage if you only discard one, because sometimes, you know, you just can't afford to discard both of them. Let's say it goes like 10, 10, 10, and then 200, right? And then they put 30 on like a Meowth. You probably want to discard the Raging Bolt and the Meowth, right? Because, I mean, at least these other cards are still providing value. Ogerpon can still draw you cards with Teal Dance. Latias is your, you know, maneuverability engine. Pheasantipity still draws cards once stuff is knocked out. But Meowth is doing nothing on the bench, and Raging Bolt is just going to die to a Phantom Dive, and you don't really want to give your opponent that value. So you can put the Chien-Pao into play, discard the Raging Bolt, discard the Meowth, because you're discarding the stadium and have to have 5 bench Pokemon, and all of a sudden, Dragapult's a turn behind. And in this matchup, where you are super aggressive, always chasing down Dragapults and chasing down these 2 prizes, it is very difficult for your opponent to kind of keep up with you. And that's something that this deck really loves to do, is kind of mess up your opponent's game plan, but just by a little bit, just by maybe just discarding your stadium, right? Or just one Unfair Stamp, right? It doesn't have a lot of disruption. It's not like Dragapult where it's going to be using Crushing Hammers every single turn. It's going to be using Red Card every single turn, Unfair Stamp, right? This is kind of like, I just have 1 turn of going Unfair Stamp and 1 turn of going Chien-Pao, and then that's that, right? But this also ties into other things, right? You might be thinking, wow, you essentially have 5 stadium bumps, right? Well, if you really do think about it, you have a lot more than 5 stadium bumps, because Watchtower is a card that kind of turns off this deck, right? Your main draw engine is the Mega Kangaskhan, and the search engine is a Meowth, right? Fez is like the pseudo, same as like Teal'c Ogerpon. These are like 0.5 of draw engines, because they don't really do as much compared to the, I'd say, 1 value that Meowth does, because you're using Meowth very often to search out your supporters. A lot of times you'll use a Meowth to fetch a Cyrano, and using your Cyrano, you'll get maybe like a Latias, a Mega Kangaskhan, and also another Meowth for the next turn that you can use to search out the Crispin, right? And then, but obviously Watchtower turns these off. If you get Unfair Stamp plus Watchtower, you just can't do stuff, right? Unless you have Fez on the bench to take a knockout, but a good Dragapult player is making sure to either not take knockout and spread damage, or will be knocking out the Pheasantipity in that turn, right? So it is very difficult to kind of bounce back from that. And that's why you have Qian Pao, you have Area Zero, you have Ultra Balls, which can search out your Qian Paos to kind of get out of that really sticky situation. And that is what I think this deck is really good at. It's really good at getting out of these weird situations, because everything in this deck, other than the Qian Pao, is a decent attacker, right? You attack with Latias, and you can, because you have 2 of these Psychic Energy, and it's actually quite easy to power up, because Glass Trumpet is just such a strong card on top of that. Raging Bolt discards cards, right? It discards the energies. Glass Trumpet gets them back onto your colorless Pokemon if you have a Terra in play, which usually you do because your Ogerpon has a Terra. And then from there, you can use one of your 4 energy switch to move that energy from these colorless Pokemon onto more meaningful attackers like a Latias if you need that, or a Clefairy if you need that. So that it just has some really good synergistic cards here, and I think there's definitely a really good merit to this deck. And yeah, after playing it a bunch in like Masters.net or TCG Masters, whatever it's called, it is really good. It beats Dragapult very consistently. It beats Grimmsnarl consistently. It beats Zoroark consistently. And I think against Festival Lead and Alakazam, I don't think you have a good matchup into those decks, but I think it is winnable if you have a decent start and are able to establish the Iron Crown on your second turn. Obviously, you can do it on your first turn as well if you go second, because Crispin plus E-Switch essentially gets you there with the Teal Dance, but it is quite a lot to get you there. You definitely need to start like a Kangaskhan, you have a Meowth in hand, you need to make sure you can find your Iron Crown, and also have a Teal Mask Ogerpon and an Energy Switch at the same time. So it is quite difficult to get to that position, but it is very possible, right? And that's the thing, this deck is just really aggressive. It doesn't mind just swinging, because a lot of your stuff is just on the board. You don't need to do too much to like kind of keep up with these attacks. Most of the time, you're just either using Boss or Crispin, right? That's your mid game. And it's a very fast deck, which is something else that is really good. Dragapult mirror matches can take a lot of time. And that's something that I think you do need to take account when you're playing at World Championships, right? It doesn't matter if sometimes you are the best player in the world, and if you're playing against the second best player in the world, that's going to be a close game. That might just end in a tie. So if you're playing a deck that can kind of win quick or lose quick, that's pretty good at times, right? Because you can concede fast and still know that you have time for a game 2 and 3. Whereas Dragapult, if you lose a game 1 or you scoop a game 1, it is very difficult to win a game 2 and 3 in like 30 minutes. It is possible, just very, very difficult. And that's why this deck, I think, is really good. I'll release a gameplay video of this deck a little bit later. But yeah, shout out Raging Bolt. This deck has somehow crept its way into my testing for Worlds. I just thought I'd update you guys because this deck seems pretty damn good. Anyway, see ya.